All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. It's Anti-War Radio. I'm Scott Horton, and our next guest on the show today is Dr. Ron Paul. He's a congressman representing District 14 on Texas Gulf Coast. He's the author of A Foreign Policy of Freedom, The Revolution, A Manifesto, and End the Fed, among others. You can find his archives at LouRockwell.com and at antiwar.com. And we're very happy to welcome him back to the show. Hey, Ron, how are you doing?
Doing well, Scott. Thank you.
I'm very happy to have you here. So first things first, big news today. There's a skirmish in Korea, apparently started by the North. The South retaliated. 2 are dead, 16 wounded. And I think the world wants to know, if Ron Paul had won the presidency in 2008, what would your Korea policy be? And how different might this situation be this morning?
Well, I'd pretty much ignore the whole thing, and I'd continue to work on bringing our troops home. By this time, though, if a good president had been elected, he'd had the troops out of Korea, and we wouldn't have been involved. This assumption that we are automatically going to go to war if there's a war over there is ridiculous. War is supposed to be very, very cautiously done, and only done with a declaration. But this idea that we sign treaties, station troops, and assume that no matter what happens, we're going to be in the midst of a war. This whole idea that North Korea is going to be a danger to America or South Korea is total nonsense. They're having a little border skirmish there, compared to the skirmishes going on between Mexico and the United States. It's rather minor, So this whole idea that we have to show our muscle and come down hard, the neighborhood should take care of it. Maybe Japan wants to have something to say about it if something flares up. South Korea is so powerful, they can handle themselves. China may have an interest in settling things down, too. But the United States has no business over there. It's not in our best interest, and the sooner we realize that and get out of there, the better off we'd be.
All right, now, if George Bush had not undone Bill Clinton's agreed framework deal from 1994, which basically said we'll give them light water reactors that won't produce weapons-grade material, we'll bribe them with fuel oil and with money if they will just promise to stay within the Non-Proliferation Treaty and their safeguards agreement. If that deal was still on and you were the president right now, would you continue under that deal, or you'd go ahead and write that off as well?
Well, that's messy, too. If they do what we tell them, we're going to give them some benefits. If they don't do what we tell us, we're going to threaten them with bombs. I don't like those options. But I would try to work toward, normalizing things, to talk to them and trade with them. And if there's something that can be done to develop, peaceful use of nuclear power with guidelines, I think that's worth talking about. But to have something to say, well, if you do this, we're going to send you this and give you some benefits, I don't think we need to do that. I think that things have been worked out in other countries, around the world. So I think we, should have left that open at least. But I think we should have this other option rather than just either bomb them or bribe them.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, just promise not to go to war with them, or not promise not to start one, and drop all the sanctions, try to open up trade, and just treat them like a normal country.
Yeah, and, we should have done that with Cuba a long time ago. And, I saw some good statistics here, although we haven't normalized things with Cuba. The amount of, farm products we're selling into Cuba now is really doing pretty good, and we need to continue in that movement. So that's been argued by many, especially the founders of our country, that if you trade with people, you're not as likely to fight with them.
Mm-hmm. All right, now we have a war on terrorism going under the authorization to use military force, supposedly at least, from after the September 11th attack. But I was wondering, with your position in the House of Representatives, is there any way that you could try to pass a Boland-type amendment that would forbid Barack Obama from spending American tax dollars or printed dollars waging war in Yemen or Somalia or Pakistan, since those are not official wars, but we seem to be waging them anyway?
Well, it's a shame that the Boland Amendment had to be passed. I don't think I was there when that was voted on, but I would have supported it. But that's the Constitution. They're not supposed to do those things. You're not supposed to be involved in war unless the Congress approves it. So it's not that another Bolin amendment dealing with the Middle East. That's not going to happen because the Republican leadership and even their program that they circulated before the election was sort of bragging that they would support Obama in almost anything that they would do. So the Republicans would never bring up a Bolin type of amendment. And the Democrats aren't going to bring it up, and it couldn't get passed. So it's tragic that we even have to think along those terms, but it's based on the assumption that our presidents are going to act outside of the Constitution, that they're going to wage war secretly. And it's so bad now that even if we denied them official funding, at times they can raise money in banking, in the drug war. They can raise money by finagling the Federal Reserve's ability to subsidize foreign countries. There's all kinds of things that they can do. Government's out of control, but we should do our very best to try to get the control back.
Well, if you were sitting on the National Security Council right now advising Obama, what would you tell him about Yemen and Somalia? There are bad guys there, apparently.
Yeah, I'd just say come home. Maybe, if there are bad guys in Yemen, they have to deal with them. There are bad guys in the United States, and they might even be foreign born. But, if there's somebody from Yemen here in the United States and he causes a crime, we don't call up Yemen and say, you ought to get over here and take care of this guy. We arrest them and we try them. We don't expect them to come over here and pick them up and take them back home. So if there are bad people over there, they should take care of it. And, of course, the hostility directed toward the United States would be greatly reduced if we realized and understood what blowback is all about and why people do want to harm us.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a very important point, something we talked about at length with Tom Engelhardt about Chalmers Johnson, his book Blowback, on the show yesterday. And of course, people remember you confronting Rudy Giuliani about that with the simple truth, right, that history began before September 11th. That wasn't the start of this war. That was just one step in it.
No, I think the war. I think we're in a 20-year war now. It's up next year. I think we embarked on this, after we sort of encouraged or at least said we wouldn't be concerned if Saddam Hussein went into Kuwait and settled their border dispute on who owns some oil wells down there. So when we invaded Kuwait and went up into Iraq and continued bombing for 10 years and starved and so many of their people, that's the beginning. It's been going on for 20 years now, and I'm in the process right now of trying to label exactly how much that cost was, which is hard, whether it's a financial cost, lost jobs, debt that we have, our lives of our American soldiers, that has been lost. So it's been on for a long time, and I think it's expanding. Obama hasn't slowed it up one bit. He's taken it into Pakistan, he's into Yemen, and they want to go to Iran, and they don't hesitate to threaten North Korea. So it's ongoing, and the real tragedy is I never believed I lived to believe it that our leaders would actually be so bold as to say, well, war sometimes can help you get out of a bad economic situation. We knew those ideas floated around, but they're a little bit more blunt than I like, that a war is actually helpful, which is insanity because it really doesn't. War always hurts the economy.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, David Broder, the dean of the Washington Press Corps, ran an article in the Washington Post like that recently, and apparently George Bush had made a comment like that. To, I think, the president of Argentina or something. But you pointed out many times Osama bin Laden said his plan was to bleed us to bankruptcy. He understands real economics, apparently, and that's what he said, right, was that he was trying to get a reaction out of us to bog us down and break our empire in Afghanistan, just like they did with our help against the Soviet Union in the 1980s.
Yeah, and
which you opposed at the time, if I remember right.
Yeah, he even implied that they weren't going to concentrate on coming to our shores. He said, fine, you come and we'll fight you on our sand. Yeah. And I think he also made the statement of him, if I'm correct.
I'm sorry, Dr. Paul. Hold it right there. Everybody, it's Ron Paul. It's Anti-War Radio, and we'll be right back after this. All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. It's Anti-War Radio. I'm Scott Horton. I'm talking with my hero, Dr. Ron Paul. You might remember him back in 2008. He gave the greatest speaking tour on behalf of individual liberty and peace in the history of mankind. And we're crossing our fingers and hoping he reprises that role in the next presidential term. I won't make you answer me now, though, Dr. Paul. I'm sorry. So when the break kicked in, you were in the middle of a point about Osama bin Laden trying to lure us into Afghanistan to bankrupt our empire.
Yeah, I think he was rather clear on that maybe, at least to me, he was implying that maybe they don't have to plan another attack on, in this country because we're right over there. And just think, after we went over there, and to his surprise, we went into those country wholesale, so there were a lot of targets. So he's killed 6,000 of our people. And, there were no Al-Qaeda in Iraq before we got there. We pretended we were going in there, but Saddam Hussein didn't permit Al-Qaeda there. Now there is Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
Yeah, there's still a problem there.
Yeah, and of course, the country is a mess. They say, oh, yeah, we're on the verge. One of these days we're going to have a government, but we continue to build bases there. The resentment is strong. There were no weapons of mass destruction. They're a close ally, of Iran. As bad as Saddam Hussein was, his balance of power said that he had to tolerate and protect Christians. So there were a million Christians that lived there peacefully. And now more than half have been routed, and they expect that the rest will be routed. So our going in, along with the help of the British, actually de-Christianized, a place where Christians had lived for one of the longest times in all of history. So the achievement is a disaster, and they're bragging about how wonderful it is, and the expense in terms of dollars and lives lost, and of course collateral damage over there is unbelievable. So I think Osama bin Laden, sits back and looks and say, well, he's still achieving it. He's bringing on our bankruptcy, and the Americans are stupid enough that they're destroying their own liberties. Then they see, it's almost like Osama bin Laden is enjoying what the TSA is doing to us. So, but it's our fault. But also, there's a rising outcry right now. So I think the American people are beginning to wake up. And I think that's something about what's going on with the Tea Party movement. There is a healthy resistance to what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm. After all their Democrat wars now, what's to believe in there for a Republican, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and I'm not sure if you saw this, but Rolling Stone published an interview with one of Osama bin Laden's sons just a couple of months back where he says in plain English, this was my father's dream, was to lure the United States into Afghanistan, to bleed them to bankruptcy and destroy them like the Soviet Union.
Yeah, you'd wonder why the American people wouldn't pay attention to those kind of statements and think, well, maybe our foreign policy is flawed. Mm-hmm. But no, there's too much control on what the people see. Actually, as far as foreign policy goes, most Americans probably don't even care. They don't pay that much attention to it. That's why I sort of like the TSA issue, because the pictures of this groping and the abuse is front and center. It's on our TVs today, and everybody's heard about it, and it's so abusive that I think the American people are saying, boy, maybe things are as bad as some of us have been saying. So I think this helps wake up more people.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And, it's a great entryway to talk about foreign policy, too. When I remember, especially when you were running for president before, they would ask you, well, what departments would you abolish? And you would surprise everybody by saying, well, how about we abolish the Department of Homeland Security? But, of course, if Al-Qaeda is going to attack us all day, every day without the Department of Homeland Security, then we need that thing. You're crazy. But then you can make your point. No, all we have to do is change our foreign policy. We won't need a national police force at all.
Yeah, I mean, they were supposed to be protecting us. We were spending $40 billion before 9/11 for gathering intelligence, and there was a lot of information there that could have helped, prevent 9/11. But now we're spending $80 billion, and they think, oh, we must be a lot safer. Well, of course, there's more that would like to kill us than ever before, and we're bankrupt, and we're undermining our liberties. I would say we're, to the famous question of all politicians, they say, oh, is the country going in the right direction or the wrong direction? I would firmly answer, so far, we're going in the wrong direction. I'd sure like to help turn turn the direction around and go a different direction.
Yeah, well, and the Department of Homeland Security, just even the name of that thing, but plus all the fusion centers and the operation of really kind of consolidating police power in this country, it seems like if we can't get that thing repealed sometime soon, and Homeland Security is a permanent fixture of American society, then we're going to have a lot of lost liberty, more even than we've been anticipating, perhaps.
And that's not going to be on the agenda. I think the three of us that voted against it when they were establishing it, but we might be able to get them to back on a couple things. But how bad the Patriot Act was, and people started complaining and campaigning against it, and the Democrats didn't like it. So as soon as they had a chance, Pelosi led the charge for renewing it and making it more permanent. So it's hard to cancel things out. That's why it will not be easy to get rid of Obama's medical care system too. Although that was a big issue in the last campaign, I just hope we can do some good on that. But the idea of in 6 months from now that's going to be repealed, it's just not going to happen because first off he'd veto it anyway.
All right. Well, Dr. Paul, I have a dream. Not that it'll work out or anything, but here's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see you run for president again, but with Russ Feingold or Dennis Kucinich, a good progressive who's good on peace and the Bill of Rights and the most important things, who's for accountability for criminals in government, and on Wall Street, etc. And then we could redo the two-party system in America, and we could have us versus them, peace and freedom versus the war party, and then you could just make your major talking point that Sarah Palin and Barack Obama ought to run together as the war and inflation party, and then we can just get rid of all this silly old left-right and have a real realignment and keep our Bill of Rights.
Good point. I think that people ought to contemplate what you've said.
I sure would like to see that. And, your son has made such great inroads with, as you say, you call them the Tea Party right, the new kind of populist Republicans out of power, right wing. And it just seems like you're the perfect one to finish that realignment with this upcoming campaign and get somebody like, Feingold or somebody who's really good and see, a lot of people on the left are really disappointed in Barack Obama for filling out George Bush's third term. And it seems like, if it really is the kind of crisis and emergency that you and I think, agree that it is, maybe now's the time for a real shakeup, for a real realignment of American politics.
Well, we certainly need it, and there's more people talking about it. But unfortunately, the base becomes pretty loyal, But I think you're right. I think there are a number of progressives that are breaking away. But in Washington, I run into the people who are partisans before they believe even in their progressive ideas. They are not basically principled. But the people outside of Washington can see that Obama has come up short even in those areas.
Yeah, well, afraid so. Well, thank you very much for your time on the show today. I know you have to go, Doc, but I really appreciate you staying on with us here.
Good, Scott. Good talking to you.
Appreciate it. That is the heroic Dr. Ron Paul, Congressman representing District 14 on Texas Gulf Coast. Please read A Foreign Policy of Freedom. It's 30 years' worth of speeches. Such wisdom in that book. It's really great stuff. And check out his archives, original.antiwar.com/Paul. We'll be right back.